It's the most wonderful time of the year. If you've been around my corner of the internet for a while, you know that every year I do one special sale all on my own, not in conjunction with TBT site-wide sales or anything else. And that's my Cheer for the New Year sale. This is a week-long celebration, and it happens at the beginning of January every new year, and it is my biggest discounts I ever do in my store all year long. Each day, there will be a different deal that is good for 24 hours only, okay? That's right. It's 1 week long of deals with a different deal every single day. Now, here's the kicker. You need to be on my email list to participate because I only send these daily deals out to my email list. I do it every morning at 7 a.m. Eastern time. And so if you want a chance to snag It's Not Rocket Science resources at their lowest price all year long, you need to be sure that you are on my list so you do not miss these Cheer for the New Year specials. Okay, so you can join if you're not already at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/winter. And when you do, you will be given 4 free winter-themed high school science resources as a thank you for joining that you can use as you start this new semester. Okay, so that's itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/winter, and stay tuned for all the details coming to your inbox about Cheer for the New Year, the first full week of January. We've made it to the end of another year together, and also to the end of our countdown of the top 5 episodes of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast from 2024. I am so excited to share with you the number 1 most listened to episode from this year before we dive into new content next week for the new year. So stay tuned for that. But the number 1 most listened to episode from 2024 was the episode where I shared 5 tips I wish I'd known my first year as a high school science teacher. These 5 tips are all very much lessons that I learned the hard way. And I am always out to serve teachers, especially new ones, by helping them learn from my own personal mistakes. So I hope this episode will do that. So without further ado, let's dive in. This is Secondary Science Simplified, a podcast for secondary science teachers who want to engage their students and simplify their lives. I'm Rebecca Joyner from It's Not Rocket Science. As a high school science teacher turned curriculum writer, I am passionate about helping other science teachers love their jobs, serve their students, and do it all in only 40 hours a week. Are you ready to rock the time you spend in your classroom and actually have a life outside of it? You are in the right place, teacher friend. Let's get to today's episode. First and foremost, I have to start with this, and that is leaving work at work. If I could be with each of you in person, sitting in your passenger seat of your car right now while you listen to this, on your drive, or next to you while you're washing dishes in your kitchen and cleaning up from the day or packing your kids' lunches for the next day, if I was there right next to you right now, I would do what my daughter loves to do to me, and I would take either hand on both of your cheeks on either side of your face, and I would look you in the eyes, and I would say this so intensely in your face. Leave work at work. Do not start the habit of bringing piles of work home to do on your nights and your weekends. Just don't do it. I know it is so tempting. I know you have so much to do and not nearly enough hours to do it. But you have to set some boundaries if you want to last in this career. And I want each and every one of you to last. And if you start this habit, it is really, really hard to break. I think first-year teachers are especially susceptible to this. If you are like that fresh out of college first-year teacher like I was 22, fresh out of undergrad, again, like single. I was living with 4 other girls. I was taking grad school classes at night. But again, I didn't have any other people I was responsible for taking care of. And so it was so easy to naturally start bringing piles of work home and, cutting and laminating, station cards while watching Say Yes to the Dress marathons and, then bringing stacks of lab reports home to grade. And soon I was regularly lesson planning and then starting to email parents from home. And then you get in the habit of not being able to fall asleep because you just got some crazy email from someone and you're all stressed out about it. And I just wish if there was truly one thing I could do differently, it would be to just not bring the work home. Even though I didn't have kids I needed to rush and pick up from carpool, I wish I'd even rather just stayed later. I understand that working 40 hours a week is nearly impossible your first year. I wish I'd at least, if I was going to work late, just done it in the classroom and just protected my home space better. I know this is so hard to do, and I have a lot of thoughts about why you shouldn't do this and how to accomplish it. And I'll link a blog post in the show notes about that. And then especially specifically to email, if you're like, there's no way I can't bring stuff home, at the very least, can you not bring your work email home? Delete that off your phone. Delete this management system app off your phone and don't check the email. Like if you're only going to set one tiny boundary, would you set that one? I have an episode about this, episode 77. I'll link in the show notes. It's 5 myths I feel like all teachers have about their work email. It's just like the smallest thing you can do and it will have exponential impact. So I really want to encourage you, leave work at work as much as possible as you possibly can, especially in these first years. Just don't start setting those habits. They're so hard to break. Okay. Second thing I want to tell you is systems will save you. Now, my natural personality, I'm naturally inclined towards a system and a spreadsheet and an alphabetized spice rack. Okay. That's kind of in my DNA. But even still, I think I really underestimated as a first year teacher just how many like spur of the moment on the spot decisions you have to make. Teaching requires so many decisions in the moment, all while having an audience of teenagers waiting for your response. It requires immense adaptability and spontaneity. And those are two things that I do not do well. But like I said, things I do well are systems and consistency. And so what I found over the years was that my students definitely need consistency in their lives. I mean, I feel like every year their lives get more and more chaotic. They're just living in mass chaos. And by creating a classroom culture where expectations were clear and actions and reactions were consistent, it allowed my students to be able to relax and engage more and really trust me as an educator, especially in those early years where I didn't have a lot of experience to make me a very trustworthy teacher. You know, I didn't realize how big of a factor that trust would be in building relationships with my students. And so I really think having systems, it allowed me to create a classroom culture that students felt safe to learn in. And then it also helped me as someone who struggles to adapt and be spontaneous and make spur of the moment decisions. It helped me to have something to default back to or like refer back to when I had to make all those in the moment decisions with answering a question or how to engage this classroom management issue or whatever. And so I just can't emphasize this enough, like how helpful having these procedures and rhythms and routines were in allowing me to be a proactive teacher as opposed to a reactive, but also to help me in those moments where I do have to be reactive because I couldn't prevent them. What do I do? Where do I go? How am I fair with students? I mean, it helps so much. And so I have a blog post with my 4 like must-have classroom systems that will make your life and your students' life so much easier. And episode 91 of this podcast is some of my top routines and procedures that I've established to, again, help with being proactive in the classroom. Absolute game changer. I wish I had done that sooner. It kind of honestly reminds me of when my husband and I were going through premarital counseling. The couple that were like assigned to us to do our premarital counseling, they had us like read this workbook essentially. We worked through it on our own and then we'd come together and talk about it with them. And there were all these different like hypothetical situations. And so we were supposed to write out our responses to them and then come together and talk about them fresh, like in front of each other. And I remember my now husband being really frustrated by it because it led to a lot of really hard discussions and like, honestly, like arguments about hypothetical things that hadn't even happened yet. And he was like, why are we even talking about any of this? Like, it's like a non-issue. Like, let's not argue about things before they're actually problems. And I totally get where he's coming from. He's an eternal optimist and an Enneagram 7 to a fault avoids conflict like the plague. But at the same time, there is such a benefit to being proactive about situations before you're in the heat of the situation. Having some hard conversations while they aren't that emotionally hard because they're hypothetical. Let's talk through some of these hard things. Let's kind of get our bearings on them. Obviously, we can't predict every single thing, but we can just have some of these natural conversations. For example, one of the things we talked through was, hey, if you experience infertility or if having biological children doesn't go as naturally as you'd anticipate, kind of what do you guys think your next reaction would be? And we really talked through this in detail before we got married. Both felt really passionate about pursuing adoption over like in vitro fertilization or other medical interventions. Not that we think there's anything wrong with that. It was just kind of where we fell. And then lo and behold, 3 to 4 years into marriage, when we got our own unexplained infertility diagnosis, it was like in a sea of chaos and like so much emotional overwhelm, that was a clear path for us of what's next, what our next move was, because we'd already talked through it in advance. And that's like the beauty of thinking through a lot of these things in advance and having some systems, making some predetermined decisions. Again, I'm not trying to like put you in a box and be like, you can't change your mind. You of course can. But I think especially if you're someone like me who gets really flustered by things that catch me off guard, things not going to plan, I'm not a very flexible person. Having these systems, thinking through these hypotheticals in advance, so helpful just to kind of have, again, like that default to go back on. Okay, so leave work at work. Systems will save you. The third thing I will say, and this is something I kind of mentioned in last week's episode 129, but parents are an asset and not a burden. And I will say, like, if you told me that I would have this podcast episode and that would be something I would say my first year teaching, my mind would have been blown because communicating with parents was by far my least favorite part of the job. I dreaded calling them. I waited until the absolute last minute to do it, like when a student had so many zeros and had pushed me to the brink discipline-wise. And that was a terrible strategy because then things were so charged emotionally. And some parents got so mad that I'd waited so long to reach out to them. Like I just did things horribly. But I mentioned in last week's episode, my much more experienced teacher friend, and I say much more experienced, she was only 1 year into teaching further than me, but it was her second career. She just felt so much more experienced and mature than me. But Jamie was the first to open my eyes to see like working with parents can help me be a better educator. And it wasn't again until I transitioned into a different teaching job that I really started to take parent communication seriously. But when I did, and I saw how I could have this team of people, me, the school counselor, other teachers they had, their parents or guardians, like we could all surround a student and support them. It took the pressure off. I wasn't the only person having to get this student to the finish line. There were a lot of stakeholders invested in the student's success, and keeping up with parents, it was no longer just like one more task on my long list of things to do every day. I saw it as a resource to serve students better if I engage their students. And I'll link in the show notes, again, that blog post that talks more about my parent communication system. The fourth thing I recommend, and I wish I'd known my first year teaching, was to use my sick days. Okay, now I'll have a caveat to this, but here's like kind of the context from that point. When I was a first year teacher, there were 2 women in my department who were within 3 years of retiring. And so both just really shared so much wisdom with me. We had department lunches every Friday together. Our whole science department ate together because we all had the same lunch block. And one of the main things that stuck with me over the years was the way they both just really implored me to use my sick days. Even if I'm not physically ill, they were like, I wish I had taken mental health days and used those sick days. They are so often overlooked as teachers. And I think especially as high school teachers, we are most likely interacting with like 100 plus students a day, and they're becoming young adults. Like a lot of them are dealing with some heavy stuff in their lives, huge burdens on their shoulders. And not only that, but like teachers are expected to do so much with so little. You have so little time, so little resources, and so little compensation. And so most of us are running at a pace that is just not sustainable for the long term. Like, especially as a first year teacher, I feel like I was fueled by like adrenaline and Starbucks. And so their encouragement was to take the sick days and don't be scared to leave your students with a sub. I was especially scared because my first year teaching, I was on a 90-minute semester block schedule. So like missing a 90-minute class period felt very hard. Like that's a lot of time to make up for. It was easier when I taught at a school with 50-minute class periods. But there are still so many meaningful things your students can do and learn without you there. And I will link in the show notes my podcast episodes and blog posts about, leaving things for a sub and meaningful lesson plans and all of that you can do. But I just think taking that time away to rest and recharge is so important. You can even take one of your sick days and use it as a catch-up day. One day off a quarter that you're going to do some batch lesson planning and really catch up. Then you can use all of your planning periods for lab prep and grading. That's one way I was able to kind of reclaim some work-life balance. And even if you take your day off and you're using it just to rest and not work, that's great too, or if you are like, well, I shouldn't be using all this time to work. Well, work in your jammies and like get yourself, take out lunch and make it a special day so you are still getting some rest, even if you are working on that day off. Y'all, I can't emphasize enough how much these two women expressed this with intensity. They had both stockpiled sick days for their maternity leaves and then also for payback days when they retired. So like our district had a policy where you were paid at retirement for days off that you didn't use. So they both said instead, they wish they had used short-term disability insurance to cover their maternity leaves, and that the money that they were making at the end that they were getting paid back for, they were like, I don't think it's worth it. I think that time off and the preservation of our sanity and mental health would have been more worth it. And again, I know some of you have to save your sick days for when your kids get sick, but that was another thing. They were like, I wish I'd used them. And then if I needed a sick day for my kid that I didn't have, I just took a day unpaid here or there, as opposed to, again, just pushing myself so hard. These teachers have been teaching for 25 plus years. I just thought that was really, really interesting. And then I know for me, I wasn't planning on moving. And then my husband's job moved us. And so I only had at that time 2 years of sick days piled up. But I literally think I had 8 sick days accumulated that weren't going to transfer with me when I moved schools. So that's the other thing about accumulating sick days. You might be saving them for something in the future that never actually happens. And so I remember at the end there, I was using sick days like left and right. At one point, they were like, hey, why don't you just take like a week off and get 5? We can see what you're doing here. Like take a week and take 5 of these days off instead of us having to keep finding these little subs here and there. It was kind of funny. But I just think that was something I never thought of before. So I want to encourage you to use your sick days. And then the last thing I'll say is this. Please ask for help. Don't be afraid to humble yourself and ask for help. I was so worried as a first-year teacher that if I asked a question, it would make me look stupid. And that's really a major pride issue. When I was finally willing to humble myself and admit that 1, I don't know it all, and 2, I desperately need help, I grew so much as a teacher. So please ask all the questions. If you need help, ask. The worst case scenario, if you ask a question, is someone's going to say no. And then you're not any worse off than you were before. So please ask all of the questions. Use the resources of experienced teachers around you. Use the Facebook groups that are like so active. Use everything in your disposal that you can to ask questions. Y'all, if you're out there and you're a first year teacher, I just wish I could give you a virtual hug. I just have such a heart for first year teachers. I love your energy and drive. I'm so excited for you to start in this amazing career. And I just hope that these suggestions challenge you and encourage you. And even if you're an experienced teacher listening, you can still apply these. Leave work at work. Systems will save you. Set up those systems. Consider parents an asset, not a burden. Use your sick days and ask for help. None of us are outside the realm of needing help. I need help all of the time. I even think about when we had adopted our oldest, I'd never really asked for help, especially since I hadn't given birth. I just felt like I'm physically okay. I should do everything myself. Come my 3rd kid, I was begging people to help me with no shame attached. And so adopt that kind of energy and just ask, okay? Thank you so much for listening to the #1 most listened to episode of the Secondary Science Simplified podcast of 2024. You can find the show notes with all links mentioned at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/episode 163. Please leave a review today if you haven't already. If one of these 5 tips has simplified your life this school year so far, and also if you are looking for more ways to simplify your life as a secondary science teacher, I would be remiss if I didn't point out that I have virtual professional development courses for high school and middle school science teachers. They are available all the time. They are no longer in a live cohort teaching model. I re-recorded them and have uploaded them so that you can grab them whenever it best suits you. You can buy just one unit. You can buy the whole bundle of courses titled Secondary Science Simplified. You can buy one unit and try it out and then invest in the bundle. You can also just check out the free Labs When Limited virtual PD course I have available to see kind of what this virtual PD course method and style looks like and works like, to see if it matches your learning style. So this is a great time to do this before you jump into the new school year. Use some of your time off in a way that you can restart this new semester with a more simplified teaching style. And I think these courses will really, really help you. So I'm going to link all of those in the show notes. And you can also find them at itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/PD. All right, teacher friends, that wraps up today's episode. If you're looking for an easy way to start simplifying your life as a secondary science teacher, head to itsnotrocketscienceclassroom.com/challenge to grab your classroom reset challenge. And guess what? It's totally free. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you here next week. Until then, I'll be rooting for you, teacher friend.